Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. So this video is all about traps, how to make them, and how to use them. So let's get started. First, in order to trap, we must dissect the nature of what a trap is. All traps are made with a desired result and function kind of like a program. When X condition happens, you get Y result. For example, pressure plates. Classic traps. When you step on one, and this being the condition, then, something like an arrow flies out at you, or a blast of fire, or something else would then be the result. So then, with this sort of knowledge, how would we, as players, or even DMs, make traps? So of course, with DMs, that's a little more flexible. DMs can just say, well, this thing exists in my world, and not always really need an explanation for it. However, players, this is more for you guys. I mean, even to DMs, if you want to keep things more like rules as written, that's fine too. So first of all, I'd like to get the more obvious/quick solutions out of the way about how to make traps, and that is spells. Yes, indeed, you've actually got plenty of spells and abilities that are made exclusively for trapping. So first up on our roster, we have Glyph of Warding. This is the trap spell. It's a fun spell that basically lets you put any other spell into it, and when that glyph is triggered, the stored spell goes off. People really like coupling this with devastating evocation spells usually, and even if you might not want to dive too deep into these aspects of Glyph of Warding, it does have a more basic effect where it just lists, hey, it deals this kind of damage, and you can just use it from there. And of course, Glyph of Warding is a level 3 spell. If you're looking for some lower level options, Cordon of Arrows and Snare are really good choices. So Cordon of Arrows creates a mini magical trap that you can use to attack unsuspecting targets that walk too close to it. It basically goes and starts sniping arrows at people that get a little too close to its area of effect. And Snare is a first level spell that if triggered will grab and dangle a target in the air. Let's say you're looking for something a little higher level, These lower level spells, they just don't cut it for you. Guards and Wards can also be a really fun trap spell too. This is a 6th level spell, and what's really fun about this spell is that the area you can ward is much larger, and if you cast the spell on the same area every day for a year, these effects can become permanent. To contrast, with Glyph of Warding, you could only use it on an object, and if that object moves more than 10 feet, the magic is dispelled. However, with Guards and Wards, what you can do with this is you can literally go and enchant an entire hallway. What the specifics of the spell say is that you can ward a 2,500 square foot space. That's a lot of space. So now personally, in contrast to Glyph of Warding, Guards and Wards seems more of ways to keep intruders out and protect the surroundings, whereas Glyph of Warding is much more adaptable, however, it's more restricted. For example, Guards and Wards has this feature where you can actually place things like Magic Mouth, Stinking Cloud, and even Suggestion in a particular room or area. What's fun with Guards and Wards is that while the effects are up, they can continue. So even if a creature is already affected by one or it's removed, or the effect is removed or dealt with in that case, it doesn't mean that the entire spell goes down. It doesn't mean like, oh, well, we got through that one little area. It's like, no, there's more. In fact, if you come back to the same spot, you'll have to deal with it all over again. So personally, I think Guards and Wards is a lot of fun, especially in the right hands. Moving forward, Symbol is a 7th level spell and acts very much like an upcasted Glyph of Warding. It does a lot of damage and provides a multitude of effects that can affect the target. However, even though I said it's a lot like an upcasted Glyph of Warding, it doesn't mean that you can store spells in it. However, what Symbol does is very much so like how the basic effects of Glyph of Warding acts. You can go and you can take one of these pre-made effects and then slap it down, and then if a trigger condition occurs around the symbol, then it goes off. So unfortunately, once again, Glyph of Warding does have this very strong utility aspect that you don't always quite get the same amount of utility with other spells. So unfortunately, despite Symbol's power, it's not quite Glyph of Warding. Glyph of Warding, in this case, really just does have a lot of extra utility because you can store a lot of different kinds of spells in there, and that's just something you can't do with these other trap spells. And so, as I've mentioned these specific spells, there are actually a few other combos that you can do that do involve spells, but are not as direct as, hey, this spell is just a trap. You're going to have to pull a few different things together. For example, you can combine a movable object and Magic Mouth. You can set a boulder or some other large object that dangles over top of where, the targets of the trap would be. Let's say the trigger is at the target, reaches a certain point in the room, or pulls some sort of artifact, and the magic mouth would be able to observe this and say a password to the immovable object, which then temporarily undoes the magic and causes the object itself to fall on the targets. And personally, this would be great for a rocks fall, everyone dies kind of scenario, or even one of those floor falling out from underneath you kind of traps. And using this method, you would only need to be able to cast a movable object at 6th level, as well as just use the spell Magic Mouth, which is only a 2nd level spell. Another really fun aspect of this too is even using certain illusion spells to create traps for intruders or just other targets. Spells like Programmed Illusion, Major Image, and Mirage Arcane, even Hallucinatory Terrain, all have this really cool ability where you can mask certain things around you. Let's say you just create a bunch of pit traps or a bunch of spike pit traps or just a bunch of misdirection traps where, someone thinks that they're just walking along a path, but in reality they're just going to be walking off a cliff. These are things you can also achieve with illusions. And some of these illusions too, if cast at a high enough level, exist indefinitely. So now that we've accomplished our goal with getting through the spells, there are additional ways of making traps that are a little more mundane, but also much more fun when you realize just how powerful they can be. So the first thing that I want to bring up is using Tinker's tools. So Tinker's tools, like a lot of other sort of artisans' tools or just tools in general in D&D, have a little description of what they do, their lore, and they also talk about how you can get these little bonuses to certain checks, as well as certain things that you can use these tools for, as well as other sorts of mechanics that they can give you. For example, Tinker's tools have these 3 activities, quote unquote, that you can use them for. You can temporarily repair a disabled device, and that's a DC of 10. You can repair an item in half the time, that's a DC of 15. Or improvise a temporary item using scraps. Congratulations. We can make temporary, one-time use traps if we pass a DC of 20. And using a large swath of features in 5e, if you wanted to, you could actually be able to consistently roll over a 20 for this check, and straight up improvise traps using materials you have on hand. And also, I know a 20 seems like a very daunting number. Trust me, it can be, but believe me when I say that there are ways of being able to have abilities that just allow you bonuses to lots of different checks where that number really doesn't mean a whole lot after a certain point. And granted, we're going to put a pin in that because we're going to get there in a bit. You'll see what I'm talking about. So anyways, we have the ability to just straight up improvise traps using materials we have on hand. And in addition to this, we also have the option of Thieves' Tools for making traps too. Personally, the way I see it, Thieves' Tools are better for making traps and even just stronger traps in general, but they also lack more of the well-rounded nature and the utility of Tinker's tools. So just keep that in mind. So like Tinker's tools, of course, we have, the lore of our Thieves' Tools, we have a general background of them, we have activities, but the real interesting part of the Thieves' Tools is when we go down to one of their features called Set a Trap. And this feature reads, just as you can disable traps, you can also set them. As part of a short rest, you can create a trap using items you have on hand. The total of your check becomes the DC for someone else's attempt to discover or disable the trap. The trap deals damage appropriate to the materials used in crafting it, such as a poison or a weapon, or damage equal to half the total of your check, whichever the DM deems appropriate. So with this, you have 2 main options as a DM. You have either A, have the damage be relative to the items used in the trap, which makes sense, or B, you have a skill check to determine the DC and the saving throw for the trap, which also makes sense. To a point. I personally like both of these options, and I think the latter would be really good for rewarding players' creativity and rewarding high dice rolls. However, you're on my channel, which means that if you've been following along for a while, you already know that I've already thought of 1,000 ways to break this feature. All we have to do is boost our skill check with Thieves' Tools to a ridiculous degree. We could use something like the Dark One's Luck from Fiendlock to give us a D10 to our roll. We could use Guidance or Peace Cleric to give us additional D4s to add to our skill check. We could use Tool Expertise from Rogue, Artificer, or even surprisingly enough the Fire Rune in the Rune Knight Fighter subclass to double our proficiency bonus. We could use Lore Bard to give us a boost equal to our Bardic Inspiration die. The list really goes on and on. However, there really is only one build that really breaks this combo. Dhampir Swords Bard. Also, I just want to preface, and like I genuinely mean it when I say this, don't do this. It's too powerful, and it's way too stupid, and will easily upset the power balance within your games. DMs, don't allow this. Seriously, just don't. Don't do it. But anyways, a Dhampir has a bite attack, and using it, they can empower their next skill check based on the piercing damage they did with that one attack. Let's say, for instance, you're playing a Swords Bard with the Slashing Flourish maneuver, and can get all creatures within a 5-foot radius of yourself as a target to your bite attack. You can get a swarm of flies or bees, a bag of rats, or other sort of tiny creature, use your bite followed by your Slashing Flourish, and make a bite attack against all of them. And granted, the total damage that you dealt to each creature might really not be that impressive. And granted, you probably also took out all of those creatures anyways. They don't have a lot of hit points to begin with. What that really did, though, is boost your next skill check. So how the Swords Bard Slashing Flourish works is that once you hit a target, you can then expend a Bardic Inspiration die, roll that die, and then each creature surrounding you in that 5-foot space takes the damage of that attack, of that Bardic Inspiration die, as damage tied to that original attack. So let's put some numbers to it, just to make things make a little more sense. The official rules say you can fit 4 tiny creatures into a 5x5 space. There are 8 spaces around you, which means it can hold 32 creatures. At 3rd level, we can deal 1d4 plus our Constitution modifier, plus 32 times 1d6, and then add that total to our next skill check. So let's assume we have a 10 in Constitution, and we're getting average rolls for our bite. That's approximately a 2 to damage there. And then we assume we're getting an average roll for our Bardic Inspiration die, so it's going to be a 4. So our math is 2 plus 32 times 4, equaling a whopping sum of 130 on average. And then you also have to factor in that this is just the bonus. You still have to actually roll the skill check on top of this. So once again, assuming that we get an average roll for our die, our d20 will give us a whopping 10. Taking our average rolls to a whopping of 140. The DC to detect this trap would be 70. And if the target doesn't detect it and falls for it, they'll be dealt 70 damage. And just so you know, this amount of damage to any character by about 3rd level is basically lethal. Honestly, this amount of damage to any one character for pretty far chunk of the game, depending on like what your Constitution modifier is, what class you're playing, this would be pretty lethal. And this combo only becomes more dangerous the further you go into Bard. Remember that little d6 at the start? How much extra damage do you think that'll deal when it's at d12? And once again, we're just talking average rolls. So anyways, this is pretty dumb. As I was mentioning before, I did say that there are a lot of different ways that you can boost your skill checks past 20. This is something that you potentially can do. This is by far not at all what the devs intended. But granted, you have stuff like that comes about when you have a game that existed for a long time. Certain mechanics just start to blend in with each other and create really, really stupid combos. So personally, I'd say that if a player really wanted to make the powerful trap thing, where they're scaling the damage off skill checks, I would try to reward them with it, unless they try to pull stuff like this. I mean, of course, if you do things like expertise, skill boosting, you really are trying to build it to that niche, and I do want to reward players for doing that. However, I would never in a million years let this kind of insanity slide at my table. Remember, these builds are fun to think about, they're fun to talk about, they're fun to theorize, but that's all that they should ever be. They should never see the light of day. Ever. We have a lot of those on this channel, but they should never see the light of day. Take some of the wisdom of these builds. Be like, oh, that's a cool feature. I didn't know you could do that. And then use it in your own games. Enjoy it. But anyways, though, that's all the time that I have for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and that I got you more interested in making and using traps in your games. And if you liked the video, then please subscribe for even more D&D content. And in the meantime, keep smiling, keep scheming, and I'll see all of you next time.